Like, hello all you groovy people out there, I'm JT Curtis, and this is the history of rock and roll, the 1960s.
Three rock and roll bands were in the center of the gymnasium playing simultaneously all during the dance. And all during the dance, movies were shown on two screens at the opposite ends of the gymnasium. Shots of men and women on occasion. Shots where the men and women's nude torsos twisted and gyrated in provocative and sensual fashion.
If the 1950s was the birth of rock and roll, then the 1960s was its renaissance. This was the decade when the limitations of music were tested with pounding rhythms, provocative lyrics, and a large assortment of drugs.
You're stoned out of your mind, man.
Though you wouldn't have known that at the beginning of the decade, back when TV was still in black and white and everybody was still wearing suits. In fact, come to think of it, I'm not sure this is the appropriate attire for the early 60s. There we are. Rock and roll had pretty much bitten the dust, and most R&B records had become very gimmicky.
Ladies and gentlemen, here's Chubby Checker.
Chubby Checker released a cover of Hank Ballard's The Twist, which gave birth to the many dance crazes of the early 60s. In fact, a lot of the songs at the time were just naming the different dances. Seriously, who would get so worked up over a dance craze? Alright everybody, let's do the twist! Come on now! You should see my little sister. You should see my little... What the hell? What'd you do that for? What are you doing back in my house?
The twist?
What part of restraining order are you having trouble understanding?
My little sister. She really knows how to rock. She knows how to
In the early 60s, rhythm and blues artists were moving in a different direction. Artists like Sam Cooke were developing a new sound called soul.
Twisting to the rock and roller, all here you find the young and old, twisting the night away. You really gotta hold on.
Soul music and Motown in particular would later become a huge influence on rock music.
Are you ready for the night train?
James Brown live at the Apollo. That was the one that sort of kicked it off, and everybody had that. It was a huge number one to be thinking, well, this is a good role model for your stage performance.
While most rock and roll pioneers were off the charts, one lonely rocker from Nashville found success in 1960.
Roy Orbison.
Only the lonely know the way I feel tonight.
With his powerful lyrical voice and unique songwriting style, Roy Orbison would become one of the most influential rock figures of the decade. Though you will notice the production of the single is a lot more elaborate.
There goes my baby. There goes my home.
Instead of the bare-bones instrumentation heard in the past decade, early 60s recordings were dominated by elaborate orchestral arrangements.
I cry, only the lonely. Darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me.
This would be more defined as doo-wop, with artists like the late great Benny King.
Doo-wop is music that was started because there was no instruments. Background singers had to do all the work.
Phil Spector was a pioneer of production before he went nuts, perfecting his wall of sound while backing up many girl groups like the Ronettes. Phil Spector would produce a number of artists over the years, including the Righteous Brothers.
Hold on, wait. I'm sorry to, cut off your little YouTube video, but the Righteous Brothers, they were white?
Yes, they were white.
I didn't even know that. Okay, anyway, listen, enough of this mushy crap. I want to hear some rock and roll, right now.
Fine.
And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
Well, surf rock emerged from California and was dominated by guitar and drum-driven instrumentals, artists like The Ventures, Around this time, the Beach Boys were getting their feet wet in the California surf rock craze.
If anybody had an ocean across the USA, then everybody be surfing like California. You'd see them wearing their baggies.
Where have I heard this song before?
All the cats wanna dance with Sweet Little 16.
Yeah, Surfing USA is basically Chuck Berry's Sweet Little 16 with lyrics about surfing. Let's try something else. While the Beach Boys were a very big group by the time, a lot of their early songs were rip-offs of Chuck Berry, the Four Freshmen, Phil Spector, and whatever else they were into at the time. But the band did have a secret weapon, their chief songwriter and co-lead singer Brian Wilson.
I write the songs and produce them, so I have a lot to say about it.
Even his early hits like In My Room are beautifully written.
There's a wood where I tell my secrets to in my room.
And Brian would continue to grow as a songwriter and producer.
I get around, get around, I get around.
Moving up north in Oregon, the Kingsmen had a hit with Louie Louie. Boy, this song is certainly different from the pristine production of the other songs from this decade. I guess that's why they call it garage rock. But the charts at this time were really being dominated by an East Coast group, Jersey Boys Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. I do like a lot of these early 60s tunes, but they seem to lack a lot of the raw energy heard in the previous decade. It seemed like rock and roll was kind of at a standstill in terms of creativity. It was also a dark time for the country following the assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
It seemed like a loss of innocence. The country was mourning and needed something to lift its spirits up. What would that something be? No, not him. Over the Atlantic, the scene in England and pretty much the rest of Europe was being dominated by a group from Liverpool known as the Beatles. Some of you might have heard of them.
These guys have these crazy hairdos, and when they wiggle their head and the hair goes, the girls go out of their minds.
But they hadn't really made an impact in America.
All British pop stars have not made a tremendous impact on the States. How do you think you're going to fare?
Well, I can't really say, can I?
Until their single, I Wanna Hold Your Hand, hit #1 in 1963. The Beatles invaded American shores and performed on The Ed Sullivan Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles!
rest is rock and roll history. The Ed Sullivan Show turned out to... I'm getting kicked through it at this rate. Hello?
Yeah, hey, I'd like to order 2 pizzas. You can put some anchovies and some mushrooms and some sausage on there. How about a little crystal meth? You know, that blue Heisenberg stuff?
Dude, look, let me just stop you there. You got the wrong number, okay? I'm doing a video talking about the Beatles right now, and you're interrupting.
Oh, the Beatles! Yeah, that's right. I saw them on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Really?
I can remember as if it was yesterday.
All my loving. It was an event. They were totally different than anything else, and they all played their instruments really well, and the girls were going crazy, and if you were a young boy at that time, you thought, hey, I want to be a rock and roll star. From then on, I was a Beatles fan.
I bought Meet the Beatles, the second Beatles album. I listened to every one of their songs.
Wow, thanks. That actually helped.
So how about that crystal meth pizza?
Call Domino's.
Hello?
I Want to Hold Your Hand was immediately followed by She Loves You, which was followed by Can't Buy Me Love. And at this time, the Beatles had 14 songs in the Hot 100, and even filled the entire top 5 one week. Much like Buddy Holly, they were one of the first band units to write and perform their own material. John Lennon and Paul McCartney were practically a songwriting machine.
It's been a hard day's night.
Also, their first movie, A Hard Day's Night, showcased the Fab Four's quirky humor.
How did you find America?
So I left to Greenland.
And with its unique cinematography and song sequences that are almost a precursor to MTV, Hard Day's Night remains the quintessential rock film.
I don't care too much for money. Money can buy me love.
We'll come back to them later. Right now, it's time to talk about
the British invasion.
Smashing.
I just wanna make love to you.
Yes, the British invasion. Lock up your daughters, lock up your wives. These English hoodlums are on the prowl. Case in point, the Rolling Stones. While the Beatles may be clean-cut, these devil worshippers, and I'm not making that up, they actually have a song called Sympathy for the Devil, proudly wear the term bad boys of rock and roll with their sexually charged lyrics and stage moves. They may have started by covering old blues songs, but by 1965 they now have their own nasty sex lyrics in the #1 slot. Rumor has it that guitarist Keith Richards wrote this song in his sleep, proving that he is indeed a vampire.
I was asleep, I woke up, I pushed play on my little early cassette player, and there is 30 seconds of satisfaction, and then there's 40 minutes of me snoring.
Now the thing about Satisfaction is the Motown inspiration.
Sir, good sir. I was in the middle of my paranoid broadcast.
This is my show.
I do not care, you American snob. Why don't you learn about more British things like Danger Mouse, Count Dracula, Doctor Who?
Would you like some goldfish?
Now it's the same old song, but with a different meaning since you've been gone.
Motown produced some of the finest R&B acts of the 60s, including The Temptations,
Ain't too proud to beg, sweet darling, please don't leave me, girl, to go.
Little Stevie Wonder,
Now come on, now everybody sing, yeah!
and a big influence as far as the Stones were concerned, Martha and the Vandellas.
Summer's here and the time is right for dancing in the street.
In the case of Satisfaction, Keith Richards originally wanted the song's iconic 3-note line to be played by a horn section.
What I was doing on that little fuzz box was really my sketch of what the horn should be doing.
If the guitar was just going clean into the amp, it would sound like this. But you put the fuzz pedal on, and it sounds like this.
That's what I say.
And thus it became one of the most recognizable rock riffs ever.
I can't argue with that, you know, but at the same time, Otis interpreted it perfectly.
I can try, I can get
For most of the decade, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were in direct competition with one another, producing hit after hit. Like the Beatles would release Help, and a couple weeks later, the Stones would release Get Off My Cloud.
Hey. Okay, want to know the difference between a Rolling Stone and a Scottish Highlander?
What?
A Rolling Stone says, "Hey, you, get off my cloud." A Scottish Highlander says, "Hey, MacLeod, get off my you." I'll be in the kitchen.
But the British invasion didn't stop with the Rolling Stones. The Kinks turned a surplus amount of memorable songs throughout the era, but they're probably best known for the classic You Really Got Me. Ray Davies sang the song in a style that can best be described as a precursor to punk rock.
Yeah, you really got me now. You got me so I can't sleep at night. Yeah, you really got me now. You got me so I don't know what I'm doing. Oh yeah, you really got me now. You got me so I can't sleep at night. You really got me. You really got me. You really got me.
But it's really those distorted power chords that make the song so influential. You can make the case that this is one of the earliest hard rock songs. A lot of these British rockers were listening to American blues records like the late great B.B. King.
Every day I have the blues. When you see me worried, honest, you I hate to lose.
I can only imagine being a young English lad having grown up through World War II.
You were growing up in the residue of a huge world war, but you didn't know anything about it.
Rock and roll.
Why don't you hurry home?
The Yardbirds, featuring an 18-year-old Eric Clapton, started their careers by playing old blues covers. But in 1965, they topped the British rock scene with For Your Love. Eric Clapton left the group for abandoning their blues roots and was replaced by Jeff Beck, who was later replaced by Jimmy Page, who later replaced the entire band with Led Zeppelin. We'll talk about them later. Other notable British rockers include the Dave Clark Five, the Spencer Davis Group, featuring Steve Winwood, them featuring Van Morrison, the Hollies featuring Graham Nash, keep your eye on Graham Nash, he may come up later. And also, The Who.
Wait, what's the name of the band?
The Who.
The name of the group.
The Who.
The name of the band.
Are we really doing this?
Yes, we have to do this. We have to. Now, who are you? Who? Who? I really want to know.
Things ain't cool at all. Talking about my generation. I die before I get old. Talking about my generation. My generation.
Featuring an all-star rhythm section of Keith Moon on drums and John Entwistle on bass.
I marveled at that bass line. Completely original. It was fantastic.
Hell, you thought the Rolling Stones were bad? Look at The Who. Seriously, I'm not even going to say anything. Just watch them on the Smothers Brothers show.
It's not an act, it's auto-destructive art.
Honestly, there are so many British invasion groups by this point, it would take too long to go through them all.
Okay, listen, enough about Britain. What happened in good old America?
Well, we had the Monkees.
Hey, we're the monkeys, and people say we monkey around.
Yeah, groups like the Monkees were obviously trying to bank in on the Beatles' popularity. While they had a few good songs, they seemed like a manufactured product copying the Fab Four.
Then I saw her fade. Now I'm a believer.
To be honest, there wasn't a lot of memorable music coming from America at this time.
Pretty woman walking down the street.
Okay, that's not entirely true. Roy Orbison had a #1 hit with the classic song Pretty Woman.
Don't believe you, you're not the truth. No one could look as good as you.
Spectacular arrangements and unforgettable guitar line. This is just a masterpiece of a song.
Pretty woman, stop a while.
We'd be on the tour bus, and Roy would be at the back of the bus writing something like Pretty Woman. Great song.
In fact, a lot of rock and roll pioneers are making a comeback at this time.
It was a teenage wedding and the old folks wished them well.
Chuck Berry had gotten out of prison to release hit classics like Nadine and You Never Can Tell.
C'est la vie, said the old folks. It goes to show you never can tell.
Okay, I really gotta stop showing clips from Pulp Fiction now. Little Richard came back to making secular music and teamed up with a guitarist named James Marshall Hendricks. He may come up later.
When I got him, he was a star. He didn't mind looking freaky. Like I don't mind it.
Elvis, on the other hand, was focusing on making movies. Really dumb movies.
Pedro the bull, he was smitten. First time the love bug had bitten.
Come on, man. You're still hung up on some guy from the 50s. Give me something new.
All right, don't get your panties in a bunch.
How did you know that?
Know what?
Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, play a song for me. I'm not sleepy and there ain't no place I'm going to.
Okay, so this is the Byrds from California, featuring Roger McGuinn on the 12-string electric guitar, which would become his trademark sound. And also featured a young David Crosby. Again, keep your eye on him, he will come up later.
A lot of what made me want to sing harmony is the Everly Brothers, but the Beatles took it further.
In the jingle jangle morning, I'll come following you.
Mr. Tambourine Man was their biggest hit, but they didn't write it. It was actually written by...
Mr. Tambourine Man!
No, it wasn't William Shatner, though that version is awesome. No, not him. It was Bob Dylan.
Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, play a song for me. I'm not sleepy, and there is no place I'm going to.
Picking up where Woody Guthrie left off, Bob Dylan was originally a folk singer who wrote politically charged lyrics in songs like Blowing in the Wind and The Times They Are A-Changin'.
The battle outside raging will see you shake your windows and rattle your walls, for the times they are a-changing.
What's up with his voice?
Well, he's got a strange voice. It's kind of funny, actually.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, my son's in the wallflowers. Yeah.
How dare you make fun of me, Bob Dylan?
He did it. What? You again?
I will not have you making fun of Bob Dylan in my house.
This is my house. Oh. Look, you got a point to make, otherwise get the hell out.
I got a point to make. Bob Dylan was an amazing influence, and you three bums are not going to change that in any way.
Okay, good for you. Anyway, as I was trying to explain...
Let me tell you something. Shut up.
You know, young people today, they don't understand Dylan. Dylan was kind of the first rapper.
Preachers preach of evil fates, teachers teach that knowledge waits can lead to $100 plates. Goodness hides behind its gates, but even the president of the United States sometimes must have to stand naked.
Songs filled with rhyme, all kinds of images, political but somewhat disguised sometimes.
And you better duck down the alleyway, looking for a new friend. A man in a coonskin cap and a pig pen wants $11 bills. You only got 10.
I felt like I was in a certain arena artistically that no one else had ever been in before, ever.
And when he did like a Rolling Stone, it was on the radio and it was 5 minutes long, which was like an eternity in those days.
Once upon a time, you dressed so fine, through the bumps of dime in your prime. Then you
radio stations tried to cut it down, but listeners revolted, and so the 5-minute version was the version that everybody heard.
How does it feel to be on your own with no direction home, like a complete unknown, like a rolling stone?
And it had electric guitars and organ that weren't folk instruments. And it was like a rock and roll song. It was like rock and roll really didn't have much of a message before that, and then all of a sudden it had a message.
Okay, you know what? I'm gonna give you this Beatles box set if you go away and never bother us.
Dude, that's mine! Why can't you...
Yoink! I got rid of him. Continue.
Believe it or not, Sam Cooke was so moved by Blowing in the Wind, it inspired him to write his own civil rights anthem shortly before his death. A change is gonna come.
It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will.
And a change was in the air. The civil rights movement was in full force by this time.
That all men are created equal.
I was up close when King was giving that speech. To this day, it still affects me in a profound way.
And it is very intriguing that the music of a white folk singer from Minnesota was such an influence.
The hour that the ship comes in.
What he was writing was inspirational. He was writing truth.
I ain't gonna work on Maggie's farm no more.
However, when Dylan appeared at the Newport Folk Festival with an electric guitar, he was booed off the stage.
Pete Seeger had an axe and was going to go cut the electric cable.
For years, everywhere Dylan went, he was constantly booed for playing electric music.
I don't believe you.
There was a folk duo in New York, Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel. They had recorded The Sound of Silence as an acoustic ballad featuring their smooth harmonies.
And the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence.
But it didn't do anything until some electric instruments were augmented to the track, turning Simon and Garfunkel into household names.
The sign said the words of the prophets are written on the subway walls.
They would later provide music for the landmark film The Graduate.
And here's to you, Mrs. Robinson. Jesus loves you more than you will know.
Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me.
The influence wasn't lost on the West Coast. The Mamas and the Papas had a folk rock hit with California Dreaming, featuring Mama Cass Elliot. Even the Beatles took notice of Dylan's music.
He's a real man sitting in his nowhere land, making all his nowhere plans.
Quite a departure from their early material. Having already conquered the world, even becoming the first band to play at a stadium, the Beatles were starting to experiment more and more with their sound, now using the album as the preferred format instead of singles. Albums like Rubber Soul and Revolver.
Ah, look at all the lonely people.
Eleanor Rigby is a turning point in the development of rock and roll. This dark, story-driven song features no guitars, no drums, but a classical-style orchestra.
Wearing the face that she keeps in a jar by the door. Who is it for? All the lonely people. Where do they all come from?
Jeez, Eleanor Rigby. How do you get to where you can write a song like that?
Many artists cite Eleanor Rigby as a huge influence. Pete Townsend, Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin, who would later cover the song. Even Bob Marley cited it as a huge influence. The idea that a pop band like the Beatles could write a song about the human condition.
I kept hearing the name of Ravi Shankar.
George Harrison, who was known as the Quiet Beatle, had been taking up sitar listening to Ravi Shankar. And of course, I should mention, this is when they started taking drugs.
Hey dude, that hippie guy left this brownie here. Oh.
I wouldn't eat that if I were you.
I know, these are actually pretty good, you know? I mean, he must have some sort of easy bake oven in it.
Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream.
Fingers. They touch everything. Cells. When was I ever in Street Fighter?
Are you alright?
I am the owl in the word now. And if you tell anybody...
Man, when did your goldfish turn into Captain Crunch?
Dude, those aren't goldfish, those are shards of glass.
I'll take right back.
We'll be right back.